Well, hey folks, welcome to the channel. We're going to talk today about standard bullets and why I don't think the emphasis on premium bullets is that big a deal for the average hunter shooting a standard velocity cartridge. Now, if you're shooting a Magnum cartridge, a 300 Win Mag, a 7mm Remington Magnum, unless you're shooting heavy for caliber bullets like 175 grains, if you're shooting the new PRC cartridges and things like that, premium bullets are probably a must for everything but maybe whitetails, pronghorns, things like that. But for the average guy who's only going to hunt whitetails, the average guy that shoots a 30-06, a 270, a 308, something like that, standard cup and core bullet, they're called standard cup and core bullets. I'm going to give a few caveats here in a minute. Work just fine, and I'm going to give you some examples. We're going to talk about it. Everything from coyotes to deer. So, let's talk about some bullets that I have experience with. Right here, I have a box of 150 grain 30-06 Remington core locks. Everything's probably going to be reversed because of the way I'm filming it. That's fine. You'll understand. Regular pointed salt point bullet. And this is considered just a plain cup and core bullet, but it does have a locking ring inside to keep the core from separating. And it works pretty well. And from my experience, the core locks have a little harder lead than, say, a Winchester PowerPoint or something like that. Here I have a box of 30-30, 170 grain core locks. All of these loads I'm going to show you, I have taken deer with. At least deer. 170 grain round nose core lock. Pretty standard 30-30 load is going to take thousands of deer in just a month or two. A couple of months. Probably used to take elk and moose and everything else this fall. We have a box of 30-06, 180 grain soft point core lock. You're going to see a bit of a trend here, but there's a reason for it. 180 grain round nose. Took an elk with that last fall. And then we have some muzzleloader bullets. Can't leave the muzzy guys out. And we got a few different types here. We have one that I haven't actually taken a deer with, the Hornady SST. But I've taken it with the same bullet with a different colored tip, which is this, the Thompson Center Shockwave. But for some reason, the sabots that Thompson Center uses, being the only real difference, they seem to be more accurate in my gun. And then you have a very similar bullet, and made by Hornady, but not the same bullet, and I'll show you that in a second. You have the Traditions, what is it? Smackdown. Traditions Smackdown. Now everybody says, oh, it's the same as the SST, it's the same as the Shockwave. It's actually not. It does have an interlocking ring inside, just like the SST and the Shockwave. But I'll show you, they're not the same bullet. I don't know what the exact difference is. I'm assuming it's got a slightly thinner jacket. But look at this. We get these lined up. This is the SST. This is the Smackdown. They're not the same bullet. They both shoot fairly accurately my rifle. Now the Shockwave, I didn't grab that one. The Shockwave is identical other than the tip, at least externally, to the SST. So these are bullets that I use every fall. And I've also used Winchester PowerPoints. I've also used a more premium bullet, in a 35 Remington. I used a 200 grain flex tip bullets, which is still, I think it's got a slight boat tail, but it's an interlock with a tip, just like the SSTs. It's an interlock with a tip. PowerPoints, I had issues with core separation. At close range on small whitetails, when hitting bone, with 30-06 and 150 grain bullets, I found I had core separation. And I talked to some buddies that used those bullets, and they found the same thing. They often found an empty jacket inside their deer. On whitetails, does it make much of a difference other than maybe you won't get much of a blood trail? Probably not. On larger game animals, it can make a big difference. I went to the core locked over 20 years ago, and I haven't looked back. I've driven nearly lengthwise through whitetails. I've driven from hip to shoulder on whitetails through full stomachs and things like that. Haven't had an issue with penetration or core separation. There's some caveats there. I believe that these work the best with impact velocities of 27 to 2,800 feet per second or less. When they get much more than that, you may have pancaking and things like that. But if you're shooting standard cartridges like a 308, a 30-06, a 270 with the heavier bullets, 7mm 08, 6.5 Creedmoor, things like that, you shouldn't have an issue with core separation. Now, if you're shooting a 243 and you're shooting 100 grain core locks, you may have some core separation. You're going pretty fast. But if you're sticking around that 27, 2,800 feet per second exit velocity, your impact velocities are going to be right in the wheelhouse for these bullets. I'll give you some examples. I've taken numerous whitetails with the 150 grain core lock pointed soft point out of a 30-06. The very first whitetail that I took with that gun, with that load, was just shy of 300 yards. It was a button buck. He was quartering to me, walking my way, and I shot him just under 300 yards. I didn't account for the fact that he was walking. My mistake. I grazed right behind the bone of the shoulder, went on through quartering in, and shattered the hip bone and pelvis on the exit side, found the bullet just inside the hide. He went down like that. I walked up, put a shot to his lungs, and finished him off. But the penetration was spectacular. Now, it was a small, light-framed animal. I shot probably about a 90 to 100 pound field dressed spike. Hey, most of us are shooting, the most deer we're shooting are white-tailed does. 90 to 100 pound field dressed is about right. A spike, I entered behind the ribs. I found the bullet lodged in the scapula. Perfect mushroom. Went through a full stomach cavity, etc. With a 200 grain flex tip out of a 35 Remington, I did the same thing on a buck that field dressed just shy of 200 pounds, like 196, something like that, a big 10-pointer. At about 50, 60 yards, quartering away, I found the bullet just inside the hide between the neck and the shoulder. It entered behind the ribs, went through a full stomach, trashed the lungs, all that. Perfect mushroom find. I shot an elk with a 180 grain Core-Lokt soft point. I shot her 3 times, and everybody said, "Your shot placement was horrible. You shoot them once, they go down, blah, 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 blah." No. They're tough animals. This one was very keyed up. We'd already spooked the herd a couple of times. The first shot, somewhere around 240, 245 yards. Hard quartering away. I took the shot because I was confident and I had a good rest. I entered the hip in front of the femur. Did not cut the femoral artery. It exited the hip, entered the belly low, went on through, and I found it in front of the shoulder, just inside the hide. The second shot, somewhere around 250, 260 yards, or no, it was probably closer to 280 yards, sorry. Broadside, slightly quartering to, actually. Broke the shoulder knuckle, went through the other side, exited out the other side. Got both lungs. Okay, 2 shots in the vitals now, folks. The third shot, right around 280 yards, again quartering away, entered the back of the ribs, came out the sternum, trashed the liver, went through the heart. She ran about 20 yards and fell over. She was already losing quite a bit of blood. She was already getting weak. But that's what it took. Those bullets did not fail. It was not the bullet problem. It was not shot placement problem. They're just tough animals. She was full of adrenaline. They have a lot of blood volume. She was very keyed up. And it just took a long time for her to die. Now, some people are going to criticize whatnot. 3 shots through the vitals, you can't argue with that. She stayed on her feet a lot longer than I thought she would and a lot longer than I wanted. We did everything we could to get her put down as fast as possible. Another elk may have dropped within 20 yards of the first shot. This one just took longer. Some animals just take longer. I'll give you an example of that. I shot another small whitetail, probably about 70 pounds, field dressed. Broadside, he comes in. I shoot him at about 40 yards. Boom. Low through the chest. Get the heart. Break both shoulders. Or break the near shoulder, sorry. Actually, I'm wrong. That one went just behind the shoulder. He runs off to my right-hand side, turns around. I hit him again, just about the same. I actually break a shoulder that time. He runs about another 30 yards or so, stops, lays down, still has his head up, and I put a third one behind the shoulder to in front of the shoulder. His head goes down. He's done. The lungs and the heart look like you put everything in a blender. But he just kept going. You can't explain that. It happens. Sometimes animals just don't want to die. Most of the time, put one just at the top of the heart behind the shoulder, they run a short distance and fall over. I shot a rather large bodied 8-pointer, probably field dressed around 150 pounds. Went in behind the shoulder, came out in front of the far shoulder. He ran a tight circle about 20 yards and just dropped, spraying blood everywhere. I shot a 9-pointer, about the same size and everything. Right above the heart, right on the crease behind the shoulder. He ran about 10 yards, looked back at me, and just tipped over. A large 8-pointer in the same place the next year. Exact same thing. That's generally what happens. I've heard a lot of bad performance stories about the Hornady SSTs, the Thompson Center Shockwaves, things like that. I've never experienced that. I'm going to give you some of my stories. I've taken 5 deer with variations of these bullets, all of them Shockwaves but one. One of them was a Smackdown. We'll talk about that. The first one, whether there had been bullet performance issues or not, wouldn't have been an issue. I shot it at 6 yards, just under the eye. It exited behind the ear. You can guess what happened. Flop. 150 grains of loose Pyrodex. Not much to talk about there. The next deer that I took with the muzzleloader and that bullet, 250 grain Thompson Center Shockwaves. Broadside, lasered 96 yards. I hit her back. I don't know exactly what happened. I flinched, whatever. I hit her in front of the hips and broke the spine, cut the aorta. She was bleeding like crazy and almost dead by the time I got down there. But smashed the spine and exited. I put another one through her head. That was the end of it. The next one I killed, another button buck, about 75 pounds or so. Yes, they get bigger in Missouri. I know some people say, button bucks only weigh 35, 40 pounds. Not up here. It was an early October hunt. I shot him quartering to me, but he had one shoulder forward and one back, so I busted both shoulders. Exit wound, no core separation, dropped in his tracks. And the shoulders were trash. That was with 120 grains of Blackhorn 209, going pretty quick. The next one was a 6-pointer, 4 on one side, 2 on the other, kind of weird. About 80 yards, quartering 2, hit at the base of the neck, exited the back of the ribs, ran about 80 yards. Good penetration, good expansion. The lungs had large holes through them. Ran less than 100 yards and died. Decent blood trail, etc., etc. The next one was a small spike, about 60 pounds, field dressed, that I shot in Arkansas a couple of years ago. He was broadside. There was one stick between me and him, and I thought, what's the chances of me hitting the stick? I hit the stick, and the bullet veered off. I hit about mid-body and high. I thought I broke the spine. He dropped. He lifted his head a little bit, put it down, and that was it. I didn't hit the spine. I guess the bullet was going fast enough that it shocked the spine, but I cut the aorta underneath the spine. He bled out very quick. Again, all I hit was ribs. Exit wound, about yay big, what you would expect. Good damage inside. I haven't had issues with those. I prefer some sort of locking ring in a cup and core style bullet. And I was hoping that they would actually show the locking ring, but the back of the picture they don't have it. But Hornady interlocks and Remington core locks and mini Hornady bullets. Remington core locks have a locking ring inside to help with controlled expansion and keep the jacket from separating. In my experience, impact velocity somewhere around 2,700 feet per second, 2,800 feet per second, or less, you don't have the issue with core separation. Now, if you're using a light for caliber bullet, say 150 grain in a 30-06 or 130 grain in a 270, and you shoot one really close inside 50 yards and hit shoulder, you're probably going to have core separation. You smash an elk with a lighter constructed bullet at really close range in the shoulder bone, you may have some issues with pancaking or core separation. But you get that distance out around 100 yards or further, or you're using a heavier for caliber bullet, like a 150 in a 270 or a 180 in a 30-06. And you're not going to have those issues. The bullet's going to hold up much better. It's going to be going a slightly slower velocity. You're going to get plenty of penetration, plenty of expansion. And my experience is core locks, Hornady interlocks, etc., shoot really well. All my guns have always liked them. The flex tip bullets in my 35 Remington, they shot great, nice, tight little groups at 100 yards. I've never had an issue shooting an 1.5 group or less with 30-06, with 150 grain, 165 grain, or 180 grain core locks. I've shot 270s with 130s. The only issue I've ever had with them is I did have one gun that I couldn't get to group with anything, and I think there was something wrong with the barrel crown or something like that. There's something wrong with that gun, so we're going to throw that one out. 170 grain core locks in a 30-30. I have two 30-30s right now that will shoot that will shoot an 1.5 or less at 100 yards with 170 grain core locks. I've also used 150s in a Marlin 336 with a fixed 4-power scope and would get 3-shot clover leafs at 100 yards every time. They're accurate bullets. They shoot very well. And they do what they're made to do. Folks, if they were junk, they've been around forever. If they were junk and they didn't work, people wouldn't use them. And I hear people all the time on these videos talking about, you're spending all this money on an elk hunt and this and that. Why would you shoot a core lock? Quit buying cheap ammo. First of all, no ammo's cheap anymore. Second, there's a difference between inexpensive and cheap. Core locks are inexpensive. In my opinion, PowerPoints and Federal Vital Shocks are cheap. They're fine for whitetails. I wouldn't want to shoot anything else with them. I just wouldn't. Core locks and interlocks are inexpensive, but they're not cheap. They're good bullets. Again, if you're shooting magnum calibers and things like that, you might want to go to something else or go up to a real heavy for caliber bullet. Like, if I was going to shoot core locks in a 300 mag, I would probably try to find, I don't even know if they make them, but I would try to find like 200 grainers. Something like that. Core locks in a 7 rim mag, 175 grainers, 175 grain interlocks, something like that. Getting that muzzle velocity around 2,800 feet per second, so that your impact velocities are a little bit lower, so that the bullet does its work. So you're not tearing the bullet apart. They have a wheelhouse. They were designed for standard cartridges, 308, 30-06, 270, things like that. I had a Remington 700 308 that loved 150 grain, core locks. Would shoot 1-inch groups all day long. Now, it had been worked over. It had been glass bedded and free floated. It had a fixed Weaver K4 scope on it, and that was an excellent gun. I wish I'd have kept it, but it wasn't a 30-06, so it went down the line. I just love a 30-06. I've had a love affair with a 30-06 since I was 16 years old. That's going on 30 years, folks. And I have taken dozens of whitetails with 30-06. I've taken an elk with 30-06. I've taken coyotes, etc. I love that. I've taken them with 30-30s. 35 Remington. Muzzle loaders. Core locks, interlocks, those style bullets. I started off saying standard bullets. Let's just stick core locks, interlocks. Those style bullets with standard impact velocities work extremely well. Again, if you're shooting faster cartridges, if you've hopped on the PRC bandwagon, or you're shooting one of the new Weatherby RPM cartridges or something like that, by all means, use a solid copper bullet. Use a bonded bullet. Something like that. If you're going to hunt North American game, and you've got a 30-06, a 280, a 270, a 308, a 6.5 Creedmoor, a 7mm 08, 7 Mauser, 6.5 by 55 Swedes, something along those lines, try out core locks. Try out heavy for caliber bullets. 140 grain in a 6.5 Creedmoor. 150 grain in a 7mm 08 or 280. 150 grain in a 270. 180 grain in a 30-06 or 308. 170 grain in a 30-30, or even 150 grain. They're not going very fast. 35 Remington, those 200 grain round nose, pretty good. With those heavy for caliber bullets, with the performance that I've seen, you're going to be fine for game from whitetails to elk at ranges out to about 300 yards, maybe further. Now, if I was going to do it again and I was going to shoot elk at longer range, I would switch to the pointed soft points. But the round nose is what I had available at the time, and the elk hunt came very quick. It was an opportunity that I just had to jump on, and I didn't have a chance to resight in my gun and whatnot. And I knew those 180 grain round nose would work, and they did. The only pointed bullets I had were 150s. I was not going to shoot those at elk. I sighted in for 180s. I'd already sighted in for 180s, thinking someday I'll shoot elk or hogs or something. And the elk hunt came up. The gun's already sighted in for 180s. I can't find a box of pointed soft points without ordering them, and I'm not going to get them in time. So I stuck with it. That's what I'm going to deer hunt with this year. The 170s in the 30-30, the 180s in the 30-06, and the 250 grain smackdowns. And I'll tell you what, I've been really impressed with the accuracy of these. I bought these because they were inexpensive and I could buy them at Walmart. I used to be able to buy the Thompson Center Shockwaves. You can't get those. I don't know if they even still make them anymore, but I know I can't get them at Walmart anymore. But I shot the SSTs because I was told they're the same as the Shockwaves, and they appear to be. And I really liked them. It's taken forever to get these out of the box. But I was shooting a 2.5 inch group at 100 yards, which is fine for a muzzleloader. That's more than enough accuracy. These, though, I wanted to make sure they shot the same point of impact. And they shoot much tighter. My very first shot, I had a group, about a 2.5 inch group around my bullseye. I was okay with. I'd have rather had tighter group, but I was okay with it. I loaded up the same powder load, 120 grains of loose 777. Put one of these in there, dead center. This is what I'm going to be hunting with. But I've got plenty of the others in case I need a backup. I dropped a box of bullets in the woods, whatever. I know they'll work and they shoot the same point of impact. They just don't shoot as tight. I'm going to use the smackdowns. I've killed a deer with them in the past. Hopefully I'll take another one with them this year. We got an antlerless season coming up, and I'm going to do some hunting with my muzzleloader and my 30-30 and my 30-06. Try to smack a couple of does. You're going to hear a lot of things about how the bullets fail. But pay attention. You're going to hear guys talking about shooting large whitetails through the shoulder with 100 grain bullets in a 25-06. Those are screaming, folks. Bullet probably did fail. You're going to hear 130 grain 270. Everybody loves the 130 grainers in the 270, right? But they're going over 3,000 feet per second. You smack even a white-tailed doe at 100 yards and break the shoulders. The bullet's going to go to pieces. 150 grain in a 30-06. I haven't had it happen, but I could see it happen. I've seen a lot of these style bullets fail in a 243 when hitting shoulder. So use heavy for caliber bullets. Keep your impact velocities down. The meat damage is very minimal with these 170 grain 30-30, 180 grain 30-06. The 250 grain shockwaves or smackdowns or SSTs. One thing I will say, the smackdown is a little bit different. I haven't had the issue with it, but I've only taken one deer. One thing I will say though, by talking to friends, seeing them shoot animals, things like that, I will say with the SSTs or the shockwaves, and I'm going to stick with the smackdowns till it's proven otherwise. You don't want to use your standard 90 or 100 grain load with these 250 grain bullets. Find something else, like a Hornet XTP or something like that. They will expand really well and penetrate really well at those velocities because they're a hollow point. I've heard the Barnes expanders work pretty good too. But you want your muzzle velocity over 2,000 feet per second with these bullets. And you want your impact velocity around 1,800 or so to get reliable expansion. They will expand a little bit at lower velocities, but the higher the muzzle velocity, the better chance you have of these bullets expanding. You get a large, thick-jacketed bullet, it takes a little bit, so think about that. Also, I've found, now this is going to go against a lot of meat hunters and what they think, I have found with a muzzle loader with these 250 grain bullets, I like to shoot them through the shoulders and break the shoulders. One, they don't run far if they go anywhere. Two, it does help the bullet expand a little bit more. But I've shot them just through ribs and whatever, and they're fine. But keep your muzzle velocities up there. If you're not shooting magnum loads out of your muzzle loader, I'd probably try a different bullet. But if you're shooting 3 pellets of 777 or Pyrodex or White Hot or whatever it is, I think you'll really like these. 120 grains of 777, somewhere around there. I think you're going to really like these. I've had good luck with them. Had good expansion, good blood trails, and good penetration. So what's the moral of this story? If you're shooting magnums, find something else. For centerfire rifles. If you're shooting standard cartridges, 30-06, 308, 270, 280, 7mm 08, things like that, your impact velocities are in that 2,700, 2,800 feet per second mark. 2,700 I think is ideal. Heavy for caliber core locks will take anything in North America. I considered going on a bison hunt, and it just, in the spring, and I just wasn't able to make it work logistically. Those 180 grain core locks was going with me in my 30-06. And I would have come home with a cow bison. I'm 100% confident in that. I killed a cow elk with them. And I'll do more hunting and take more whitetails this year, etc. with them. The 170 grain core locks in the 30-30. I'll give a few caveats there and then we'll close. Out to about 150 yards. After that, the velocity is such that they don't expand all that well. I will say that the 180 grain round nose in the 30-06, 250 is about the wheelhouse on those. Will they take an animal at 300? Sure they will. Will they expand okay? Yes. You're not going to get the hydrodynamic shock and whatnot, though. So I'd prefer, if you're past 200, 250 yards, you'd be better off with the pointed soft points. They're more aerodynamic. They carry their velocity much further. With the 30-30, if you're going to shoot out to, say, 200 yards, I would recommend going to the 150 grainers. And I would also say, with like 140 grain core locks in a 6.5 Creedmoor, you're going to be fairly limited on your range there to get reliable expansion. But they all work, folks, and they all work really well. Keep them in their wheelhouse. Enjoy the cost savings. $25 a box versus $55, $60 a box. The deer and the elk don't know if they were shot with a TSX or a core lock. As long as you're shooting a cartridge that's not going to blow the bullet up, you're going to be just fine. I love you folks. We'll see you later.